Welcome to One Word a Day. I'm Sophie, pilot into the universe of Chinese. Let's continue exploring this jiàn character related. Yesterday we have almost the same as today's character, except today we build on top of this jiàn character. That means very small money, that's cheap, this part, and then we add water symbol next to it, cheap water, and that means splash. Okay, this 见, same pronunciation as yesterday, got two, I guess, origin stories. One is I tried so hard to unpack Chinese characters to show that the shape of it told a story of like this double X make the meaning of very small because we chop something up repeatedly into smaller chunks. And then the currency symbol from the ancient currency cowrie shell. And that's our money symbol. Both of them, like very small money, can explain it means cheap. And now I had to logically stretch myself why cheap water means splash. So I had a long conversation with Gemini, and basically Gemini, going back to scholar documents, scholar research on this one of what other linguists think about this character. The bot's research result was it's a phonetic thing. The whole thing on the right side pronounced as jiàn, and it carried over the pronunciation in this water behavior, that's a splash. There was no meaning connection. And if any meaning connection, it would be this very small meaning, because very small water means the effect when water got splashed, you see many small water that's in the air, and that's not connected from the water main body, right? You got little chunks of water next to it to create the splash effect. And we already have jiàn, now without the bei in the middle. That means a shallow water. And that's explainable of small water. Because small water means smaller body of water, therefore the depth of the water is small, therefore it's shallow. That's explainable, but now we have this monetary symbol in it, and all of a sudden it means a splash. So that's something that's hard to explain. And here is my imagination of why cheap, this concept on the right side, paired with water means splash. And I tried so hard to convince AI that is, but just couldn't came into agreement. And I totally agree that in the history of how Chinese characters evolve, there are such phenomenon that some of them formed just as a phonetic loan, because 见 might as well have existed in our verbal language, that we use this pronunciation of 见, that means water splash. However, we don't have a character to fit with it. And in fact, when we see this here, 2,000 years ago, Xushen Dictionary actually showed the visual element of 见 in a different form. And this is the garden variety of saying one meaning expressed in different ways. It's almost like one moral of the story, like the compact meaning into this one Chinese character that came with different origin stories, like different ways to visualize that. And eventually one survive and be used by later generations, which is this one, the 戒. However, this just show you through the evolutionary history that this is one other variation that ever existed and documented into that, even if it was not the current version that we inherited. So it could be phonetic loan. I need more data and check more Chinese characters to kind of form my idea of how this language evolve over time collectively, the meta language evolution process. Before then, I couldn't say for sure that this is phonetic loan or this can be explained by cheap water. So my theory of why cheap water can explain possibly as a splash is in our contemporary life, water come relatively cheap compared to gas, electricity. Water is kind of low bill, right? Cheap bill to us. So that was not the case in ancient times, because ancient times when tap water, the infrastructures of water supply to different households was not modernized after industrialization. So ancient times, that people may walk miles to carry water. I don't actually know how the towns in ancient times get their water source. There got to be service, kind of like today's water supply service of sorts to supply a whole town, because I wouldn't see how a whole town's folks would walk out of the town, or within the town, there would be some water fountains that every household go get water there. It could be ancient solution to this water supply into household units. But I would, regardless of how it was done, it was not as easy, as well infrastructured as our contemporary life. So water back then would be more expensive. So it's expensive water by default. When expensive water gets cheap, and that's the only water that you can afford to splash, because otherwise the water in its full price, in its full value, you would use it for cooking or drinking, or even bathing. So all that water need to be clean, like hygienically, nutritionally, like in its best form, so you don't get sick from it, right? And when water was somehow used and contaminated, is no longer in its most pristine form, then that's cheap water. And that's the water you can use to splash, to water your lawns, ancient version, or so. So that's my made-up story. I don't know if that's the way the cheap concept is associated with water to create a splash. All right. In any case, a few examples of how this character is used in our language. 火花四溅. We're talking about 火花, fire, flower. So Chinese use the sparkles from fire, or the splashes from the fire as 火花, as the flower. So here we can see the parallel imagery comparison of the water behavior describing the fire. And the 四溅 means all four directions that you can see the splash from the fire, or the sparkle from the fire. Chinese often use this phrase 火花四溅 to describe the heated moment of romance at a beginning stage, I guess, when physical attraction was so high that we would use the fire flower four-directionally splash to create this magical moment of, man and woman, or I don't know, other pairings that they just had such a high attraction and I guess a synergy, or somehow create this fiery feeling. So interestingly, right, that's the use of 剑 to describe human behavior. Okay, 剑墨惊飞鸟. This and 赶时花溅泪. These are two separate lines from Chinese ancient poems, probably thousands of years ago, when educated folks, I guess good enough folks, created expressions in such a succinct way, and that poem survived over time, that because of such poetry was appreciated by generations of literary men, that they survived and recorded. We can see it today. 芥末惊飞鸟 talks about the splash and the foams would surprise or startle flying birds. So it's from, I guess it's one segment of the picture painted throughout the poem to describe a natural, I guess, a natural view. I'm not sure 芥末 if it's a river or ocean, but this poet was describing how the splash and foams would startle the flying birds. All right. 赶时花溅泪. So this probably is, in comparison to the last poem, this was more, I mean, still is more famous because it probably made into Chinese Chinese language textbook. This talks about, I guess, in 1200 years ago scenery, when in Tang Dynasty, the government back then was facing this internal coup that I guess the military leader rose up against the central government, and there was war, there was death, and there was this poet describing how at the moment of war, the feeling like emotional, when you get emotional, so 时 means time, right? When the time you get emotional, 花溅泪, like even seeing a flower would splash the tears from you, from the observer. That talks about the psychological stress experienced by regular folks who are not warriors going to fight in the historical context then, but how it kind of traumatized, because it was not like fighting against people from another culture, from the northern part of China, who are like a nomadic people, totally not agriculture-based civilization. This talks about you're fighting against, internally, fighting against each other. And this caused some psychological, I guess, trauma. And 溅泪, the 花溅泪, so succinctly describe this effect of even seeing a flower would be enough to cause your tears and splash. What a wonderful use of, not just the tears rolling down, but a splash. So that created this psychological, how shaken people were in response to the time. So here is a splash of water, and you can see Chinese use the splash oftentimes on themselves. We're not talking about water. We're talking about humans. Thank you for your time. See you another day.